Hey, welcome to the podcast. Today I am talking to Mike King. By day, Mike King is the digital marketing manager for Grant Cardone Training Technologies. And by night, he's Mike, your mentor, inspiring men answer their highest calling as husbands, fathers, and friends. And he is on a mission to encourage men to step up and answer their higher calling they have on their lives as husband, father, and friends by facing their pasts and fighting for their emotional freedom. Mike, finally, you're on. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks, brother. Pleasure.
This is fun. I think one thing that we were discussing on the off air was we do talk a lot about strategy. We took talk about winning. We talk about what it takes, and that's great. And like the changes, the tactics, etc. But I think one interesting, maybe if I can use a sports or a health analogy, is that if your body and your mind aren't right, doesn't matter how good the strategies are, doesn't good outplay it, doesn't matter how good your game plan is for the game, you're just not going to be in it. Tell me why that's important to you and how you view that through your lens.
Yeah, I think that's important because I do a lot of work with men on the outside of business, and it's been my journey, and I just see it dealing with men. It's one time I had this tryout for this professional basketball team, and the trainer came up. She goes, "You know, you're not going to make this team, right?" And I kind of looked at her like surprisingly. She like, "Don't take it personal." She goes, "But this is a business." And she points to this other guy that was there who came from this really big school. He had a really big name. And even though I had just played out of my mind that day, she goes, at the end of the day, they can put him on the bench and put his name in the brochure and his name will sell tickets. Yours won't because nobody knows who you are. But she goes, game recognizes game and you have game.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is because dealing with men, like when you just get to a point where you can see it. I don't need to be told that it doesn't matter what they're doing. I can see it, and I can see when somebody hasn't taken the time to deal with the things in their past,
Hmm.
and they fail to realize how that's affecting them in business, how that's affecting them in their most important relationships, maybe their relationship with their wife, their
Mhm.
relationship with their kids, their relationship with people in their community. Because at the end of the day, what are we really doing all this for? What are we trying to build a business for? What are we
Mhm.
going to work every day for? If it's going to be all for naught, or we're going to focus on the things that really don't last and don't matter, which is relationships with others and with ourselves.
I've been reflecting a lot on that recently as well. Just we're having our second baby,
Hmm.
just talking to different types of founders and just seeing like their perspective, what they do. And some of them are older, some of them are same age, but also there's a trend, in my opinion, around younger dads wanting to be there and present, like not taking. Like I was talking to a friend of mine, like I frankly don't want to go become a CFO because it's 16-hour days, lots of travel away from family. It's great, but like it's not for me, and it's not a bad thing. There's no wrong answer on that, but it just wasn't in alignment with what he wanted to do. And I think it goes back to your perspective of why are we doing what we're doing? Is it for ourselves? Is it for others? And this isn't a judgment call or a way to condone different types of work or ideology. It's just a
Hmm.
way of perspective. And I thought I was reflecting on that. Or an older gentleman was telling me like when he was raising his kids, he's like, I just took maybe 2 days off and I went back to work. What do they need me for? I'm not going to help out. And that's a different perspective from different generations. So I think it's also seeing it through that lens. What are we doing? What we're doing, the opportunities that we have now online, but then also what you mentioned, how you show up in yourself, but also in your work, and you can measure that just by sensing it from the other person, the conversations, the tonality, the words that they use, their outlook on life, their outlook on themselves. That kind of shows. Let's go through your maybe if you have a process or your methodology, like if men are working through that, do you have a process that you go through? Do you have a some steps? What are some of the common phases you have to go through to A, awareness, B, work through it?
Yeah, a great method or a great exercise, whether it's on your phone, on a piece of paper, in a notebook, in a journal, is go out in the woods, go out to a park, go out somewhere where there is not a lot of distraction. And I
Mhm.
would suggest that you turn your phone off if you're going to bring your phone. So put it on airplane mode. Or if you can, don't even bring your phone with you. Leave it in your vehicle and go sit somewhere for a half an hour, maybe an hour, and then write down the 10 most worst moments of your life. What were those? And then think through each one of those about what made them so bad. Also, what might still be unresolved from those. I'll give you an example. When I was in ninth grade, I had this freshman English teacher. She was brand new. So, to give you a little bit of context, not make an excuse, but to give you context, I came from a single family home. My mother, I was the oldest of three kids. My dad was in and out of prison three times by the time I was 10, and then he disappeared. He ended up coming back in my life for about 2 weeks and then disappearing again. And this was the 2 weeks was when I was in ninth grade. So this teacher was really awesome, really kind, really loving, wanted to do the best. And my dad had just disappeared again. So I was dealing with all these inner feelings of rejection and abandonment. And why did not my dad not want to be in my life? And I had a really bad morning one day and I went to school and I brought all that with me. And in class, I was in this class with a lot of guys that I guess you would describe as like class clowns, maybe.
Mhm.
And we used to have this thing where if we wanted to swear, we would just change one of the letters. So we'd say ship instead of S word.
Mhm.
And the teacher would let us get away with it for 5 minutes, but then she'd get tired of it and be like, okay, guys, enough. Well, on this particular morning, she had gave us that warning. And one of the other guys said something to me. And for whatever reason, I just fired back at him and used the swear word without swearing. And this teacher, she had actually just returned from a 2 week like family leave. And we had heard whispers about what had happened. And she ended up having a miscarriage, right? So a horrible,
Mm.
traumatic event in her own life. And here she is now back at school and trying to focus on helping us. And we're
Mhm.
in this class and she tells us to stop. And then you have me who doesn't stop because I'm having a bad day and I think that I should be, for whatever reason, get to continue to act like this. And I say one more thing. And so she stops and tells me I need to go to the principal's office. And so I start arguing and complaining and being like, really, you're going to send me to the principal's office? And I don't remember exactly what she said, but I do remember what I said. And I said to her, you're a BIT, finish the swear word. I go, that's why you lost your baby. Worst thing I probably ever said to someone in my entire life. I mean, we're talking tears started coming down her eyes, her bottom lips quivering. All she could do was point at the door and mouth, get out. And I turned around and I got out and I never went back to that class. I actually ended up having to serve in house suspension for the rest of the year. So I say all that to say that personally, I consider myself a Christian, however you want to interpret that, read the Bible, try to follow what Jesus tells me to. And there would be times in my life after that that I would be thinking about that situation. It would just come to mind. God would bring it to my mind and he'd be like, you need to go find that lady and apologize. And I'd keep
Mm.
running away from it. I'm like, nope, not going to do it. That's in the past. We're just going to leave it there. And
Mhm.
so we ended up moving to Chicago for 5 years. And we came back here to Michigan. And it was the first day we're in this new house and I'm setting up my desk and I go sit down and I fire up my computer and immediately that thing comes back to my mind.
Mm.
And God says, is this going to be the day that you go and make right for what you did to that lady? And so I relented and I said, okay, this is what I'll do. I will go on Facebook and ask if anybody knows if this person is still around, which I did. And a girl messaged me and said she was still working at the school but she was under a different name because she had gotten married. So I look her up, look up her email, and I'm going to send her an email. And God says to me, no, you're going to be a man and you're going to go see her in person. Dude, I was so scared. So I called up the school and made a meeting with her. And I ended up going up there and talking to her. And we made small talk. And then finally she was like, yeah, so why are we meeting? And I go, I don't know if you remember, but I remember. And I started telling her exactly what happened that day, what I said to her. And dude, when I said that again, it was like you could see it in her eyes that it was just as fresh as it
Oh,
had
yeah,
been. And I said, "Hey, I don't know what you believe. I'm not here to tell you anything. I'm just here to say that this is what I believe. And I believe that I have to apologize for what I spoke over you and
Mm,
what I said to you. And I need to ask for your forgiveness, whether you want to give it to me or not." And when I said that, it's hard to explain if you've never been through it, but there's like a
a relief.
physical way, yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
that releases, and we were able to hug it out. And she said that she accepted my apology and said I was forgiven, which was, it brought me to tears, dude.
There's
Yeah.
something the more that we learn about the mind and the body, like, and the spirit, like, it's not too separate, we're all the same, so that is a physical thing on you, which is a weird thing
Mhm.
about I'm not an expert there, but you felt the relief, like a release, like a lightness.
Yeah. And that was the start of me going down this path of going back and looking at all these things that had happened in my life, like my dad not being there, dealing with that. My dad coming back into my life, dying of cancer, dealing with that. My brother committed suicide, dealing with that. Like all these worst moments in dealing with that. And then doing what I needed to, instead of running from those things, to face them
Hmm,
and to then really officially get to the root of those things, deal with them and however they needed to be dealt with, and then move past them. And the amount, I just call it freedom. Some people call it like mental space, clarity. I just call it freedom. The amount of
hmm.
freedom you get from going through that process, as hard as it may be, and there was a lot of tears, to trust me, and a lot of, I don't know if I'm ready to go back and deal with this moment, but
Yeah.
on the other side of that, it's just really is indescribable.
And I think to be completely safe and prudent, like this isn't what you recommend doing, but it's also
Mhm.
like when you're doing this kind of stuff, like definitely work with either a counselor, work with your team, work with someone to help you process it. Because you mean going back to situations, some of them may not be safe, so
Yeah.
there's that as well. But the fact of that is some heavy lifting work in order to be able to, because like here we are talking about, okay, what can we do to grow? What can we do to build all this cool stuff? But this is more about, okay, cool, imagine like your goals right now. Let's say you have some goals. You want that house, you want whatever, that income, what that revenue, that business, that team, whatever, that name, plaque, whatever. You got it. Cool. You're still sitting by yourself with your thoughts, enjoying an afternoon. Like those external things won't change the internal. So what you're saying right now is work on the internal while you continue to build or while you're continuing to grow, because that is pretty heavy. That is, and you're suggesting is go back and deal with it and face them, which again, prudence and discernment there, but that's definitely not easy. It's not a finished job either. It's not like, okay, I'm done. Then we move to a new list, right? Or is it like, what happens when we go through all that? What's phase two?
Yeah. So a couple things, you're exactly right. Like you have a responsibility to steward this appropriately. This
Yeah.
isn't like you just go find a stranger and you're like puke all over them and tell them your deepest, darkest secrets and
Yeah.
have them reject you. No, you steward this accordingly, whether that's with someone you trust, someone at church, a counselor, you deem who that is. But the truth of the matter is you need to do that work.
Mm,
The answer to the second part of your question, like what's next, is it's fascinating how when you start going down this path, like more things will come to mind. Your list of 10 will then go to 10 other things, and they may not
mm,
be as traumatic, but as you dig, you find out that these 10 things affected your life. I'll give you another quick example. So when I was in college, I had mentioned earlier my brother committed suicide. I was a sophomore in college. He was a senior in high school. I played basketball. And when we were done with all the funeral and all the stuff that comes with that, as you can imagine, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to school. I wasn't even sure I wanted to exist or live. But I guess I decided, or I was encouraged to go back to school and seek some sort of normalcy. So I went back and we're in basketball practice and we're doing this drill. And up until this time, I hadn't really processed my brother's death completely, just because of my MO is like when the stuff hits the fan is I have this uncanny ability to shut down all my emotions,
mm,
not worry about me, and take care of everybody else around me. And I was still in that kind of mode, even though this was several weeks later. Well, I was at practice and we were doing this drill. and I kept messing it up. And I don't know, I just got upset with myself. And there was the bleachers that the fans would sit in would get pushed up against the wall in our gym.
Mhm.
And so finally, after about the third time I'm messing this drill up, walk over to these bleachers and I punched the bleacher one time, the metal bleacher, but in a weird way, it felt so good that I just kept punching it. But the more I punched it, the angrier I got. And I just remember almost like blacking out and crying and just feeling all this emotion coming out of me and just punching these bleachers over and over. And I must have looked like a madman.
Mhm.
And everyone in practice stopped naturally. And then my coach, after about 30 seconds, he blows this whistle and I'm still punching these bleachers. And he says, Mike King, you're nothing but a GD drama queen. And that was enough to snap me out of it, get back into drill and go on. And I had left that there, never thought of, well, I shouldn't say I'd never thought about it, but rarely thought about it. Well, it was like 2 Father's Day ago. I was sitting here on my porch and God brought that back to my mind. And you got to forgive your coach for those words he spoke over you. And I had done enough work that I knew when he had brought that to my mind that he was right. So I didn't have to question it or doubt it or think about it. I was like, you're right, I do. So then I just went through this process of forgiving my coach for the words that he spoke over me at that time. Because, I can't imagine what it was like for him. He obviously didn't steward that opportunity. He didn't take the time to put his arm around me and be like, hey, man, I know you've just been through a lot. We're here for you. He just did what was natural to him in this situation. But that's just a small example. But to bring it all home, I talk about what are we doing all this for? Well, I'll speak about me again personally, like trying to build this business, right? Like not having a dad there and growing up and watching your mom struggle and work 3 jobs to try to support 3 kids. And then now you have your own family. Like I want to support my family, right? Want them to live a life that I was never able to live. But in doing so, it's very easy for me to become a workaholic,
Oh, yeah.
right?
There's a balance, right? The workaholic that works out of fear versus that works out of abundance.
Sure. But at the same time, like, if I hadn't gone back and dealt with, okay, why do I have this propensity to turn into a workaholic? What is it really about? Is it really about trying to provide for my family? Or is it really about this little boy who didn't have his dad around
Hmm.
and is trying to make up for that? And then also realizing that, yeah, my family lives a good life. But if you ask my kids, are they really concerned about the good life they live, or are they really concerned about the time that dad spends with them? And some people maybe listen to this and be like, well, that's just common sense. For me, it
No,
wasn't
when
common
you're in it,
sense.
it's not common sense. When you're
Right.
actually in it, like, you can knowing this stuff, I still get lost.
Yeah.
Right? I think we all
Hmm.
get because there's competing factors in what noise you put into your mind. So it's not sometimes common sense is not common practice.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. So I think this is a huge process. I just got myself reflecting, like, what's some of the things that I've pushed over and not dealt with or faced, and either A, physically going to forgive or B, forgiving, like internally, just letting it go. I think it's a healthy thing. It's a part of life. It's a part of who we are. But it's also what you mentioned. It brings more alignment to you, who you are meant to be, and who you're be like that person that you've been created to be. And the more in alignment that you are to that, the more that you can actually do the work that's necessary to for you and your kids, your special call for others. You might be single, you might be widowed, you might be living a different kind of life. But I think the whole idea is like, what is that alignment internally? Because externally, we show up to how we are on the inside. Like, this was a very heavy topic. I think with brevity, we've gone through your ideas around it, a process to absorb. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's very vulnerable that you opened that up. For our listeners out there, what's the best place for them to one? Thank you for being on and to learn a little bit more about what you're up to.
Yeah. On that side of things, you can go to Mike Your Mentor. It's my official nonprofit where I deal with a lot of these issues. And I actually partner with another organization where we take guys. There's a ladies event, but I'm not a lady, so I'm not on that event naturally. But where we take guys through 5.5 days of dealing with this type of stuff and really showing them the questions to ask and creating a space where they can are free from distraction, where they can hear and process these things and get that freedom that God wants them to have in their lives.
The beautiful thing, man. We'll put that link in the show notes and connect your Twitter and your IG as well. Mike, thanks for being here.
Raul, man, I appreciate it, brother. Appreciate you too.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.